Good evening. Hello, my name's Annabelle Crabb, and I'm delighted that you could all join us for the latest breast cancer trials Q&A. Right up the top, I want to apologise for the slightly late start to the session. Full disclosure, that is about me having to relocate this laptop from the beautifully set up situation that I had arranged to a place where the internet actually works in my house, which is the office out of which I have just kicked my hardworking partner. So that's what's happening at my house. I hope things are going well at your house. We are here for another fantastically informative evening on research into breast cancer. Breast cancer trials, as many of you will know, is the largest independent oncology research group in Australia and New Zealand, and they've been conducting clinical trials research into the treatment and prevention of breast cancer since 1978, over which time immense changes have occurred and advances achieved, largely due to the kind of research that we're talking about tonight. Tonight we're doing a research update and discussing what are the current trends in breast cancer research, what areas are making the biggest difference, and where this research is going in the future. And we have a cracking panel of experts who are going to be answering as many of your questions as possible on this important topic. There's about 2,500 of us registered for this call this afternoon. There is such an appetite for tapping directly into the brains of some of our smartest and most innovative researchers, and that's exactly what this session delivers. Before we get underway, I'm going to do some lightning fast housekeeping. I'd like to pay respects on behalf of all of us, no matter where we're joining this call from today, to the traditional owners and custodians of the lands from which we join across Australia and New Zealand, and to elders past and present. I'm hoping that I've already provided the most significant hitch to this evening, but if something else goes wrong with your stream, let me give you a couple of tips. If you move the mouse over the screen, in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see 3 small dots. These are useful small dots because if you hover your mouse over them, you'll see some options. This is where you ask a question, and we take and record all questions. If you experience any technical difficulties, do refresh your browser, and if you're still having issues, click info to find the link to access live chat support. And if any of this doesn't work, don't panic, because we're recording this Q&A. So if you don't get to see all of it, or if you get called away to do something else, we'll be sending a link to everyone tomorrow so that you can watch back this whole event and all the questions, and we do take note and keep and answer questions that come through as well. Okay. I'm going to introduce our panel. Some of them you've met before if you've been to a few of these sessions. First of all, Leslie Gillum, who's the chair of the Breast Cancer Trials Consumer Advisory Panel. Leslie was a participant in the TEXT clinical trial and has a personal history of breast cancer. Welcome, Leslie, and thank you very much for joining us. We have Professor Fran Boyle, who's a medical oncologist at North Sydney's Mater Hospital, where she's the director of the Patricia Ritchie Centre for Cancer Care and Research. She's also one of the founders of Australia's Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance, and we're going to be talking to Fran about metastatic breast cancer just in a minute. Professor Bruce Mann is the Director of Research at Breast Cancer Trials, also Professor of Surgery at the University of Melbourne, and the Director of the Breast Service at the Royal Melbourne and Royal Women's Hospital. Honestly, it dizzies me how many jobs so many of our panellists managed to do at the same time. And Stephen Lewin, Dr. Stephen Lewin, who's a medical oncologist at the Peter Mac Centre, Cancer Centre in Melbourne, and the study chair of the Olio clinical trial. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for contributing your brains to this evening's discussion of research. Now, I know we have all sorts of people online, some of whom might be at the beginning of what is, in rather dreadful terms, known as the breast cancer journey. We also have friends and family who are anxious for insights and details and ways to best support someone that they know and love who's going through a tussle with this disease. Thank you to everybody who sent in questions and is watching tonight. We're going to get to some of the questions. And having mentioned clinical trials, I'm going to start out by playing you a little video about a new one called Perspective. Hot tip, it does feature one of our panelists.
With cancer, we want to cure as many patients as possible, but we also want to do it with as little treatment as possible. Perspective is the international version of the Prospect study. Prospect was a study to test the hypothesis or the idea that by using MRI scans, we could identify a substantial group of women with early breast cancer who could safely emit radiation. 201 patients were treated on study without radiation. The recurrence rate in the breast without radiation was only 1%, which is far less than we would expect. A very encouraging finding that led us to develop the prospective trial to see whether we can replicate and validate the findings. Prospective is a study for early stage cancer, women over 50 with a cancer that seems to be less than 2 centimeters in size, is confined to the breast and not in the lymph gland, and isn't the triple negative type, and then are treated with this additional imaging and then hopefully minimal treatment, omission of radiation. The whole area of optimization or de-escalation is vitally important. No treatment is without side effects, but most people are happy to have it on the basis that it might help them. And they often put up with the impact of treatments on quality of life. But if this trial can replicate what we found in Prospect, that we can reliably find a group of women who can safely avoid radiation, it would be a very good thing, and it's something that could potentially change the way that breast cancer is managed. I'm very grateful to those who have made Prospective possible, and we will continue to work very hard to hopefully confirm the results of Prospect are applicable widely.
Thank you so much, Bruce. You're incredibly well organised to have briefed us in that video before you even say a word live. 10 points to you for preparation. Bruce, you're heading up the Prospective clinical trial, as we've just heard. Now, it's all about optimising treatment. You hear this phrase a lot at the moment. Can you start off with a simple explanation of what optimised treatment is and why it's so hot right now?
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle, and delighted to be here. Optimization is about the right amount of treatment for a particular patient with a particular disease. Now, often optimization means doing less treatment. If we can identify a situation where the outcomes are superb without a particular treatment, then it's quite safe to omit the treatment. In other situations, optimization is actually about giving more treatment. If we can find, and we'll hear later today, there's some really interesting work, particularly what Stephen's doing, identifying a group of women or a type of cancer that needs more treatment, the optimal outcome will come from more treatment. We often, we did talk about de-escalation, as in giving less treatment. We got a bit of pushback to that. The word optimization is better because for each person there is an optimal amount of treatment. As I said in the video, none of our treatments are without side effects. None of our treatments are without costs, but we recommend them and most women accept them on the basis that we want to be sure we're not missing something. This type of optimization research, of which Prospective is a good example, is about getting the evidence that someone can safely and appropriately reduce the amount of treatment and sleep well for the next 10 years, knowing that she hasn't shortchanged herself by avoiding a treatment that people said that she should have.
Right, that's such a big part of it, isn't it? And when people are, particularly when they have only just learned that they have breast cancer, one of the obvious and instinctive responses is throw everything in the book at this thing.
Yep.
I want to get it sorted. I want to get it out of my body. How do you, I mean, I'm interested in what you've said about the change in terminology. How do you explain to patients in the cases where you think the better result comes from having less treatment?
Yeah, it is one of the issues, and it's one of the things that we need to. Our communication skills are really important. The best example of it, and it's not relating to prospective, but it's about mastectomy or bilateral mastectomy. A number of women who've recently been diagnosed will come in and see me and say, just take them all off, with an idea that that must be a better treatment, and choosing lesser treatment, choosing breast conservation, would be them sacrificing survival for vanity. It's not true. We have very good evidence from big series that breast conservation is as safe, just as likely to cure a cancer, if done according to the guidelines, as mastectomy. And once someone gets good information, then usually the idea of an optimal amount of treatment makes a lot of sense. And what I said before, there is no treatment that doesn't have side effects. It's intuitively correct. People know that. And when we can give permission based on trial evidence that omitting a form of treatment is appropriate, most women come back and they say, I'm so pleased you said that. I came in here ready for everything. You could have cut my arm off if you told me I needed to. So no, absolutely not necessary. And we did some work on the patients in Prospect. Their quality of life was far better having less treatment, and they had less fear of cancer recurrence. So I think we've shown it can be done, but it can only be done if there is good evidence coming from appropriate clinical trials.
This might sound like a dumb question. It's a quick one. Is research into optimized treatment relevant for all kinds of treatments? Less chemotherapy, less surgery, radiotherapy, or there's some you don't want?
This will be a nice segue into further discussion. And from my initial discussion, optimization is not about less treatment. It's about the correct amount of treatment. And often that optimized treatment is about more treatment, that in this situation, optimal outcomes will come from more treatment or an additional type of treatment. And so I think, we call it, we're to optimize, it is actually what we should be doing for every patient who comes into our clinic.
Okay, Bruce, I can feel you retraining my brain as we go, and I am absolutely up for it. I've got a question from Susan, who wrote in asking, how can treatment optimization strategies be tailored for difficult to treat breast cancers?
Yes, I think that is with better science, better trials. Difficult to treat implies that our treatments are imperfect, that despite our current treatments, we are still having patients, unfortunately, have the cancer, come back and die from disease. So the way to do it is to invest in the science and the trials to work out new ways of optimizing treatment for those difficult to treat. And immunotherapy, which we will be talking about tonight, is actually a nice example over the last 5 to 10 years of a new optimized treatment that is being optimized for some of the most difficult to treat cancers.
Yep, and causing a lot of excitement as well. I'm going to divert now to Fran Boyle. Fran, because we're tight for time, I'm not going to run through all of your qualifications again, but I will remind those on the call that Fran is one of the founders of Australia's Metastatic Breast Cancer Alliance. And we have had a lot of inquiries about research into metastatic breast cancer. Erin, I'm going to jump straight to one of them, has asked, where is research up to for metastatic breast cancer? And with a smaller number of patients, is there enough being done? And I know that the definition of enough is very, very flexible. Fran, I think you're on mute.
Not only enough, but smaller is something that's up for debate at the moment, Annabelle. Up until last year, we didn't really have good data about the number of people who might actually be living in Australia with metastatic breast cancer. And the Cancer Institute in New South Wales was able to, with some fancy computing in the background, work out that there were somewhere around 8,000 people in New South Wales living with metastatic breast cancer. And when you multiply that across the Australian population, it's 25,000 people. And that's pretty similar to the number who are diagnosed each year with early breast cancer. So we are talking about a large population of people who might be interested in various kinds of research. And that's probably about twice as many people as we thought.
That's so fascinating.
And one of the reasons for that is probably that they're living longer. So that's a good thing. It's also true that there are more opportunities for them to think about whether a clinical trial might be an appropriate part of their treatment. Some people will be involved in a clinical trial as soon as they're diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, and that's particularly the case if they have a type of breast cancer called triple-negative breast cancer. For two of the other main kinds of breast cancer, the hormonal and the HER2-positive breast cancers, it's quite well established what the first treatment choice is likely to be, and often that works for many years. But when it comes to changing treatment, that's where there's a lot of activity in the clinical trial space. So as new drugs come along, they come first to people who've perhaps been diagnosed for quite a long time, and then to people who are choosing their second treatment, and eventually to people who are choosing a first treatment, and then eventually to people with early breast cancer. So it can be quite a long road for a new treatment. And the people who do access those treatments in trials, the earliest are people with metastatic breast cancer.
Okay. I always just assume with science that there's registers kept of everything, and we all know all the numbers at all times, but that's because I'm a right-hand side of the brain person, and I assume that somebody who's grown up is in control of these things. Bronwyn has asked, and this seems relevant given what you've said, is there an Australian-wide database where researchers are monitoring those with metastatic breast cancer and collecting data on the rate of success of treatments?
No, there's not. And there isn't a national database. There are some what we call registries, and they're often patients who are being treated in quite big breast cancer centres where they've opted to collaborate with a group in Melbourne called BioGrid, who have particular projects around, for instance, triple-negative breast cancer or hormonal breast cancer. And maybe 20 of the 80-some sites in Australia and New Zealand might be involved in submitting data to those registries. It's not done in a way that that patient can be identified, so privacy is protected. And that's actually probably one of the main reasons that nationwide databases don't exist, is that they do tend to violate the privacy principles and run the risk that important health data that might be something you want to keep to yourself, you might not want your employer, for instance, to know that you've got metastatic breast cancer. So it's not like a license plate where you can look someone up and see who's the owner of a vehicle. But we do track in those registries people's how long their treatment works, what they go to second, what particular side effects they might have. And I think there's really scope to expand that process. Metastatic Breast Cancer Action is advocating for all women with metastatic breast cancer to have their case discussed in a multidisciplinary team meeting, which is what we do in early breast cancer. And we very much hope that each of those teams would be collecting at least their own data so that in due course we can learn more by collaborating and putting that information together.
Great. Thank you, Fran. I think I've watched too many crime dramas where there's always a register for everything from tyre tracks to Band-Aids to whatever. Angela has asked, and obviously has been reading a lot of the reporting of advances in immunotherapy of late. Is immunotherapy available for metastatic breast cancer?
For some of those patients who have metastatic triple-negative breast cancer, immunotherapy is available. We test for a particular marker on the surface of their cells called PD-L1, and that helps us to identify the patients who are most likely to benefit. So again, it's an example of personalisation. Immunotherapy is not without its side effects, so you don't want to be giving that to people who are not going to be likely to benefit from it. So it's probably a fairly small percentage of the people with metastatic breast cancer. And fortunately, it is paid for by the government, which is good news because it's expensive. In that circumstance, it's an important step forward to improving survival for those patients. So we're very pleased to be able to offer that. But it's not something that is given on its own the way it might be in patients with melanoma. In breast cancer, immunotherapy works if you give it with chemotherapy. You need the chemo to crack open the cancer cell and reveal the bad stuff inside for the immune system to recognise. Whereas in melanoma, as you may have been reading with our Australians of the Year, big advances in melanoma, there's plenty of bad stuff on the surface of melanoma cells. And so the immune system can be stimulated to respond to that much more easily. You don't have to go breaking those cells to reveal their inner workings and their nastiness.
Oh, Fran, that is such a clear explanation. I actually understand, and I didn't before. So thank you very much. That's a great analogy that's visual and powerful, and thank you. That's why we pay you the medium bucks to be on this panel. Danielle has a question, which is, how is drug tolerance factored into the metastatic research settings?
We know that anti-cancer drugs walk a fine line between being active against cancer cells without damaging too much of the normal tissue in the body. So the very first part of how a cancer drug might jump from a laboratory setting to humans is exactly that, its tolerance. How much are people able to tolerate that hits the target within the cancer cell that we want? Not so much that they're getting unnecessary side effects, and not so little that they're not getting the benefit that we want. And so those are called phase 1 trials, and they are part of the very early development, again, always in people with metastatic disease. And there's a better linkage in Australia now between places that are offering phase 1 trials to be able to identify patients who might be interested, and to try and make sure that people are understanding what kind of research they're involved in. Sometimes people on phase 1 trials benefit greatly from the new treatment, and sometimes they don't. And so it's important to go into that kind of study with eyes wide open and a good understanding that it's more about tolerability that they're hoping to establish. Sometimes people pull a rabbit out of the hat. Herceptin was a good example, that there were people on the phase 1 trial whose cancer went away, but that's not so common. It's more common that those people are helping us to understand how future patients might benefit.
Thank you, Fran. I'm going to pivot now into a closer look at immunotherapy research. We're going to start with a video about the OLEO clinical trial.
We know that young patients with early breast cancer can have up to 2 to 3 times the risk of breast cancer recurrence. And what we've done in our research is to look at the tumour itself to try to understand what features of the tumour are making this cancer more aggressive and more likely to recur. Young women with early breast cancer are treated usually with chemotherapy, but we believe that targeted therapeutics in addition to chemotherapy could improve the outcomes of these patients. Olaparib is a well-established PARP inhibitor. The other drug, durvalumab, is a type of immunotherapy agent. So we believe in combination with the PARP inhibitor and the chemotherapy, this will enhance the activation of the patient's own immune system to naturally target the tumour and improve outcomes. Patients that are eligible for this trial are less than 45 years of age and have an early breast cancer that is considered high risk. Patients who are eligible will have a test to determine if there is a feature called homologous recombination deficiency. Then the patient may be eligible for the Oleo clinical trial. So I'm extremely excited. I've really dedicated my work towards building clinical trials that are targeted at the specific biological features that these young women have. We believe early intervention is crucial, and I think using a targeted approach is going to help lead the way towards optimizing outcomes.
Well, as luck and good planning would have it, we do happen to have the individual heading up the Oleo clinical trial with us right now, Dr. Stephen Lewin, who is a medical oncologist at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne and study chair of this trial. Stephen, there is a lot of discussion and excitement around immunotherapy at the moment. Where is it centred with relation to breast cancer?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Good evening, everyone. So I guess starting at the beginning, we've known for a long time actually that there is a relationship between the immune system and cancer. But I guess what we've sort of recently learned is that the magnitude of the positive impact of the immune system differs substantially between different breast cancer subtypes as well as between individuals. And usually at the point of diagnosis, those immune cells are completely exhausted and have no ability to control the cancer. So the role of the immunotherapies that have been successful to date are to reinvigorate those immune cells so that they can really control the cancer. Obviously, this is a very attractive treatment option because we know that the immune system can have things like memory, and so if you can bring memory into the immune system, you should be able to reduce the risk of things like recurrence and so forth. And so, we've really moved immunotherapy into breast cancer, but, being honest, we've had to work a bit harder than some of the other tumor types to really get immunotherapy to work in breast cancer. I guess the low-hanging fruit of breast cancer, if you can call it that, is triple-negative breast cancer, where we usually see a lot more immune infiltrates. And we started doing clinical trials with immunotherapy in triple-negative breast cancer, and we've now brought it into the early stage setting, combining it with chemo, and we're really getting the best cure rates and the best survival rates that we've seen to date. And so that's really exciting for us, and that's where the research is. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more to do in terms of understanding, I guess, one, how is the immunotherapy going to work in combination with other treatments for the other breast cancer subtypes, some of which are much more common, and what are the best ways to partner it? What drugs do we need to use with it? How much is necessary to be used for optimization, as Bruce would say? Last year, we had 2 really impressive trials presented at international conferences, one of them led by Professor Shireen Loy, one of our colleagues, looking at hormone receptor positive HER2 negative breast cancer and using immunotherapy showing good results. So I think this is a really exciting field with more to come.
Okay, well, that's amazing. We've talked already about optimization. I guess we're thinking about using techniques in conjunction with each other. There's a question from Louise who asks, is immunotherapy a safe treatment option, and do benefits outweigh any possible risks? And are there intersections with other treatments that change that status?
Yeah, great question. So in breast cancer, it's uncommon for us to use the immunotherapy by itself. So we sort of need to understand that concept first. So we typically combine it with something that we try to synergize with the immunotherapy, and most of the time that's with chemotherapy. Of course, many people will be aware that chemotherapy has side effects. So using chemotherapy with immunotherapy is something that we really need to think about in terms of both the benefit to the patient as well as the potential side effects. So this is not necessarily a simple question. And this is where the key role of the treating clinician to really weigh up those factors of the additional benefit with the immunotherapy and the potential side effects. Now, with immunotherapy, the most common side effects that we know of are when the immunotherapy can overactivate the immune system. And when you get overactivation of your immune system, it can get a little bit confused and not only target the cancer cells, but it could target the patient's other cells themselves. So like their skin or their liver or their lungs, and you can get inflammation in all sorts of parts of your body. And we know that this is, this can particularly happen if you use immunotherapy for a very long time. And there's probably a proportion of patients who are more prone to these kind of side effects. So there, for example, the type of patient we'd be really particularly concerned about using immunotherapy might be if they are known to have something we call an autoimmune disease, where they're known to have a disease already where their immune system is overactive and so forth. So I think, for us, it's all about talking to your treating clinician about that balance of benefit and toxicity, but also we're making a lot of research efforts into trying to work out what are the best partners, how do we minimize toxicity, how do we give the optimal amount of treatment. So again, this is a really big area for us to work on.
Every time I attend one of these sessions, I learn more and more about how every patient is different and is a different constellation of characteristics and vulnerabilities and opportunities and cancer characteristics. My respect for what you people do grows every time I hear more detail about it. I'm going to wrap up this part of the discussion by conveying a question from Marie-Louise, who's asked, where do you see immunotherapy research going in this field in the future?
Yep, so at the moment, we're trying to learn lessons from a lot of our colleagues. I think Fran already spoke about this. In melanoma, we're world leaders in immunotherapy. And one thing that they demonstrated last year in a really important clinical trial was the use of immunotherapy in what they call the neoadjuvant setting. So if you've got a cancer that is potentially operable, so you can operate to remove it, using treatment with immunotherapy and possibly chemotherapy before the surgery is what we call neoadjuvant treatment. And we've kind of learned from our melanoma colleagues that that's probably the optimal time to use immunotherapy. And that's, I think, where we're heading and trying to optimize in that space. Yes, we're using it in advanced breast cancer as well, but hopefully the idea is if we use it in the early breast cancer setting and we can prevent much more advanced disease. So I think that's kind of, optimization in that piece is going to be really important. At the moment, with triple negative breast cancer, for example, we really only have one trial that we use sort of the regimen for, and it's a pretty heavy regimen with chemotherapy and immunotherapy. And what we want to understand better is, is there a way to optimize that to reduce the chemotherapy load, maybe use a more novel type of treatment? So there's these new treatments called antibody drug conjugates. Will they work better with immunotherapy? Do we need all the immunotherapy that we're meant to give via the trial, or can we give just a part of it if a patient does very well on the treatment? Those are sort of the important questions for us. I think the other part to immunotherapy in the future is novel treatments. So of course, everyone has heard of the term mRNA from COVID times. There is a lot of work being done in the mRNA space, vaccines, which stimulate the immune system, and indeed there's even more complex immunotherapy treatments that we call them bispecific antibodies or CAR T cells. These are all sort of things in early phase development, still a little while away, but there's a lot of research in that area.
Such an interesting area of research, because it feels like harnessing the genius that's already in the human body and redirecting it in a redoubled way. Amazing. Thank you so much for conveying all of that intelligence in such an articulate way, Stephen. We're going to have a look now at patient involvement in research, which is very core to what breast cancer trials does. And I'm going to play you a quick video now that features another person from our panel.
how do we know if we're doing the right research if we don't have the patients involved? That always sticks with me, because how does that researcher know that they're going to make a difference if they don't have someone involved with their research with that lived experience? Once I was diagnosed, as part of my treatment, I was participating in a clinical trial called the TEXT trial. I had to undergo a different type of treatment to what was standard treatment. Because of that clinical trial, that is now standard of care for people diagnosed with breast cancer, similar to my own. So I guess that was the start of my interest in clinical trials, being a participant and seeing the difference that can make. We consider a consumer to be a patient advocate. We're advocating for clinical trials, we're advocating for trial participants, and we're advocating for breast cancer trials as a whole. One of the things that is quite important with our research is that patients and participants know that there is patient voices involved in designing that trial. And on CAP, the majority of us have been on a clinical trial. We are involved in helping design the trials, so the patient is at the forefront from the start, and we have that impact to be able to help researchers look at things differently. It's really important to ensure that whatever information is provided to patients that may not have a good understanding of English is written in a way that they will understand. And an exciting thing that CAP has been involved with is the e-consent videos, and that helps them to be able to participate by watching a video and being informed, and then being provided with the documentation to assist in that informed consent process. It's a very collaborative team. We are engaged with all the researchers, the organisation, and if you express an interest in joining, you would be welcomed, because we can never have enough patients at the table.
Okay, so that was and is Leslie Gillum, who's the chair of the Consumer Advisory Panel at Breast Cancer Trials. Welcome to the panel, Leslie. Thank you for that video. It was very pleasant to meet your puppy, as well as hear about the role that patients and the community can play in breast cancer research. I guess we think about cancer research, or I always do, as being people in labs with test tubes and so on, but actually you don't need a science degree to be helpful in this area, right?
No, that's right, Annabelle, and thank you for having me. And I guess being involved in this panel is a clear, I guess, example of how BCT engages with consumer representatives. So if I think, you know, the Consumer Advisory Panel, we play a really vital role in the research by being the patient's voice and ensuring that they're at the forefront of the research. And when it comes to the science degree, we don't need a science degree. We're not there to look at the science. We're there to ensure that what is being asked of trial participants is not too burdensome, and whether, you know, whether that be how many clinical trials, how many clinic visits they need to attend, or that sort of thing, that they're not asking too much of the patients who are already going through quite a journey, as you said, that word we don't necessarily like. But also, like, the other things we can do is ensure that things are written in a way that patients can understand. So we talk about informed consent quite often, and we need to work with researchers to ensure that what is being given to the patients is easy to understand, is inclusive, and will actually enable participation.
Okay, and is this unique to breast cancer trials?
There are patient advocates and consumer representatives, I guess, across a broad range of research institutions, both here and New Zealand, but globally as well. But I think that our role on the Consumer Advisory Panel is unique because we're considered part of the team. We're a small group, but we work collaboratively with our researchers. We don't necessarily need to have a loud voice to be heard because we are always asked first before we actually have to raise anything. And I guess one of the important roles that we play is we're involved in all the subgroups of BCT, the concept development working groups, so those initial stages of a clinical trial, one of us is involved in, on all the steering committees for the trials, and also on the scientific advisory committee, which is where the discussion happens as to whether a trial is worth doing. I guess when I reflect on the uniqueness of the CAP is that the CAP has been running for 25 years now, and it was established long before it was a requirement to have consumers involved in your research. And I think that just shows to the commitment of BCT to make sure the patient is at the focus of their research. And in fact, at the recent St. Gallen conference in Vienna, CAP, or the role of CAP, was highlighted as being best practice throughout the world. So we're very proud of that.
That's pretty cool. Leslie, I was interested in your video where you talked about making proactive steps to include women who might not feel comfortable negotiating their way through what can be a pretty scary space. What was it that made you interested in getting involved in research?
Well, I guess if I think back, firstly, it was my relationship with my oncologist who provided me with the information to participate in a clinical trial. And then that experience of being so supported, and as I mentioned in the video, I was assigned to the investigational arm. And then that became standard of care. So that was really rewarding as a patient. I mean, at the time of a diagnosis, there's not a lot of things you can control, but I felt like because I was on the trial, I had some impact on I get not so much my treatment options, but more around, quality of life and things like that, information I could give the researchers to help. And so then when I was still on that trial, I had the opportunity to go to a BCT ASM, which is a scientific meeting, and it really opened my eyes to the research and the incredible difference it can make. And so I thought I need to give back because I was so fortunate to have had a trial opened that I could participate on. So then I thought I had to give back, and I have a daughter, and I guess wanted to make a difference in any way I could. And I every time I go to a conference, I look at the researchers, and they are so empowering about their dedication to saving lives from breast cancer.
I have been fortunate enough to talk to a few participants of trials who have appeared on these panels, and I'm always just amazed at the compulsion to give back, which is essentially what participation in a trial is. It's, well, I don't know how this is going to work for me, but if it works for somebody else down the track, then it makes it worth it. There's a lot of generosity involved in participation in these trials, particularly in their early stages. What's interesting to me about hearing you talk about CAP is the idea that the flow of information is not just from oncologist to patient, that the flow of information can be helpful going the other way as well. Do consumers actually get a role in prioritizing what areas of research are invested in?
Yeah, like I can only speak on behalf of CAP, I guess, but yes, I think because BCT includes us in all aspects of the organisation and at all levels of, I guess, the strategy around clinical trials, we have the opportunity to reflect on our own lived experience, but also use our knowledge that we've gained either by being a trial participant or just being on CAP and being educated around clinical trials, but also using our networks. We've all got quite significant networks in the breast cancer community, and we use that to inform, I guess, all the researchers and committees of BCT on gaps where we think there's, research still needs to be done.
That's so well put, Leslie. I think sometimes there's a human tendency to think once you've lived through an experience that somehow that knowledge is universalized. It hardly ever is. So
no,
sometimes it's really worth, even though it seems obvious to you, repeating it and reinforcing it with people who may not have noticed everything that you noticed at the time. Thank you very much for outlining so beautifully the work that CAP does. I'm going to bring the discussion back to Bruce Mann, who you'll remember from our conversation not long ago, because we've got a question for Bruce from Meredith, who's asked, is there a gap in opportunities for research and studies to be open in rural and regional areas?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I'd like to just make a comment following up from what Leslie said about the prioritisation of areas of research. Over the last few years, this has been a specific strategic objective of BCT, of the organisation, to broaden the scope and to work on the idea of consumer-initiated research, specifically recognising that there are some questions that are apparent to the consumers, to those who've been through the breast cancer experience, that may not come to the researchers. And by combining the insight from the consumer with the trial expertise or the other various expertise of the clinicians, the more professional researchers, we think that there is a great gap there that we're aiming to fill. And next time we may have some updates on that. As far as the rural and regional area, great question and quite relevant to the trial that Stephen talked about. So the OLEO trial is critical for a very small subset of breast cancer patients. It makes no sense to open that trial in every centre because most centres will not have an eligible patient. So what we've worked on and we are implementing is the idea of, what do we call it? Don't know what our catchy name is, but it's central triage. So that if a doctor or a patient thinks they may be eligible, then what we can do at our base in Newcastle is to assess and determine whether that patient is suitable, and if they are, put them in touch with the closest trial site. I think it is the only way that we can do that as breast cancer treatment becomes more more niche. The other thing we are doing is looking specifically to have some trials that are suitable for broader groups. We have a trial called Optima, which is using one of these, a new type of a test, an assay, to see whether patients with moderate risk cancer can safely avoid chemo. That's something that is widely applicable. And that's actually open in 50 sites across Australia and New Zealand, so very widely available. They're sort of two ways that we're approaching it.
Great, thank you. Half of my brain is now just trying to think of a catchy term that means central triage, but I'm going to park that for a minute. But please, if you have any ideas, if there are any ad executives or whatever in the audience, please send your creative suggestions through to Bruce. I am going to throw now to a video question from Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and my question to the panel is, how far away are we from breast cancer being treated as a chronic disease? Thanks.
Bruce.
It's interesting. There are two ways of looking at it. Most early breast cancer is cured, but we generally recommend treatment for quite a long time. I'm not sure whether that's a chronic disease or not. The other area, and it's fascinating, some of the nastiest disease, the HER2 positive disease, which when I trained was, if it had spread, was almost universally fatal early. We have patients who are 10, 15, 20 years after diagnosis with metastatic disease who are still alive and apparently disease-free. I don't know the data. Stephen and Fran will suspect immunotherapy is probably so effective in a subset that metastatic triple negative is chronic. My view would be it's vital that we find it early when it is much more the curable and, de-escalate optimization. But those in whom we don't, for whatever reason, yes, aim to live a long time very healthily is the aim.
Bruce, thank you for that. And you've provided me with a perfect segue into our next question, which actually goes to Fran, I think. Vicky, when we're talking about finding cancers as early as possible, there are a bunch of factors that might affect that. And Vicky has asked about dense breasts. Now, I'm listening carefully because every time I turn up for a mammogram, I'm one of those people where they go, whoa, what's going on here? This is very tricky. Vicky wants to know, has there been any research that people should go straight to an ultrasound if they have dense breasts, or are mammograms still the most appropriate first line?
You want me?
It's a very good question, actually, and one that is receiving a lot of discussion and advocacy at the moment all around Australia. What dense breasts actually mean is that they have a lot of fibrous tissue in them and less fat. And that means that when you do a mammogram, basically you see a lot of white stuff on the mammogram. And given that most breast cancers look white, or sometimes sparkly white, it can be hard to see in that sort of background. It's like looking between a wood for the trees. And it can make it harder to see a breast cancer. And it can also mean that someone's way of metabolizing hormones or perhaps other growth factors is a little bit different. It can be inherited, so it's something that tends to run in families, and it's much more common in younger people. Now, what's the optimal screening program? I'm going to actually suggest we ask Bruce, because I know that he's been involved in this debate and also in the challenges about if you're told you've got dense breasts, what additional information should you be given about screening? So can we funnel that back to Bruce? And then I've got a question or perhaps a response to the chronic disease question.
Bruce, why don't you talk about dense breasts, and then we'll get Fran on chronic disease, and then we'll get back to the programming.
Sure. Dense breasts, it's really big. It's very important. The thing to say first is that irrespective of breast density, a mammogram is better than no screening. So mammograms work at all density. They don't work as well in those with high breast density. And there are other screening tests. Ultrasound is one of them. 3D mammograms another one. MRI is another, or the contrast mammogram. These are all options. And what is ideal is difficult. And one of the challenges we have in Australia is that we have this wonderful nationwide free it to the consumer system of breast screen. We want to preserve that, but we can't be offering MRIs to everyone. We don't have enough machines. We don't have enough money. A lot of work is going on to identify what is the optimal screening for those with high breast density. And where we're at is breast density alone isn't the question. It is not the only part. It's breast density plus things like family history or other factors. Those who are identified to be at high risk, then the question, and it's really for their doctor and or breast specialist, is should I have an ultrasound as additional, or should I have one of these other contrast-based MRI or or contrast mammo. I think it is in early disease, this is the key research question. We need to work out what is the most feasible, acceptable, effective and affordable way to improve what is a great system, Breast Screen Australia, to something that is even better. That's a lot of words. I haven't quite said the answer, but the first part is mammography is still very effective irrespective of density. The question is who should have something more than that? And now I'll hand back to Fran for whatever it was, chronic disease.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Bruce, for that elaboration. Fran, you have an answer from Michelle, who asked by video a minute ago, how far are we away from breast cancer to be treated as a chronic disease?
It's a good question, because anyone who's actually suffered from a chronic disease doesn't necessarily see that as a wonderful addition to their life. And when we started to talk about breast cancer as a chronic disease, we were talking about people living essentially with metastatic breast cancer for often many years, where their treatment might change over time, but where the activity of the cancer could be measured and their treatment could be adjusted. And the model for that is something like diabetes, where before the discovery of insulin, diabetes was a universally fatal disease. And with the discovery of insulin and the ability to measure blood sugar, people's sugar could be controlled and their diabetes could be managed, but eventually they would develop complications, and those complications might be something that they still died at an earlier time. So it was about trying to turn metastatic breast cancer a little bit into being like diabetes. Now, I'd still prefer not to have diabetes or metastatic breast cancer. And so I think we need to get better at tests that help us to tell women that they're cured of their early breast cancer, and that their treatment, let's say tablets, can stop at a particular time, 5 years maybe after, or 10, and that they can, you know, gaily go off into the sunset and still have a mammogram every year to make sure they're not getting a different new breast cancer, but we can give them the all clear and we can say basically like, you're done. And that we are not at just right yet. And I think that's a huge frustration for patients and doctors alike, because we know that that fear of recurrence is something that really dogs people and impacts on their quality of life. So some of us are collaborating on a project we hope to get underway with shortly that will help us to improve the development of some tests that work in that space, so that we can give those people that Bruce has cured, or perhaps I've cured with my tablets, or even our radiation oncologist might have cured. We don't talk about them much, but maybe they cure people. The team needs to be able to say, our job is done here, off you go, live a healthy life. And we need some better tests before we can do that.
So interesting, isn't it, Fran, the way language makes a difference to the way people feel? And I guess we've had a little bit of a snapshot this evening of how treatment outcomes have improved over the last few decades. And even Bruce can remember from earlier in his career how different prognoses were. I guess chronic disease sounds a bit less horrible than fatal disease. So people think, well, bank that win, but also they're still experiencing the scanxiety, which we know is such a huge part of once you've got past that really interventionist treatment phase. And very exciting to hear that you have not forgotten about those people and are working on ways of offering some more certainty and ability for people to move on from that.
That's an example, Annabelle, of where the consumers have been so influential in our decisions about research, because they make the observation that if we knew who was already cured at the end of their initial chemo or surgery, we could get them out of the clinic for a start, which would have massive emotional but also health economic benefits for everybody. And then we would be able to focus attention on the people who still did have cancer and find more tolerable treatment so that they can stay on them for longer. So sometimes you can treat diabetes with tablets. You don't always have to inject insulin. You know, it's a good example of how treatments evolved from something you've got to inject to something that you can take as a tablet. So the consumer voice has been very strong in saying, don't forget about trying to give that all clear to people.
Great, thank you, Fran. Question from Debbie, and we've talked about dense breasts and also the importance of early detection. Are there any exciting areas of research in diagnostics for earlier detection of breast cancer?
Probably for me.
Take it away.
So the areas of research, there's 2 or 3 of them. One is the whole idea of genetic testing for predisposition, identifying a subset of the population who is at much higher risk of breast cancer than others, for whom more intensive screening or risk reduction can be done. And there has been quite a lot of that, identifying specific genes or genetic patterns across the whole genome. The second is the better imaging, and I mentioned a couple of them. There's contrast mammography, there is MRI, a lot of interesting stuff being done there. The third then, a third one is the use of artificial intelligence, particularly on imaging. Some fascinating studies suggesting that a computer and a machine, the computer can look at a mammogram that is normal and predict future risk, risk over the next 10 years. It's stunning to think that may be possible. But if it is, it can identify those women who should have more intense screening. Then the fourth that isn't quite here, but has been talked about for a long time, might come along, are blood tests. The idea of a blood test that can either identify someone who may have a cancer, and it's not only breast, it could be a number of cancers, but maybe the alternative is a blood test that, if there is no signal, that person is at minimal risk of a particular cancer or cancers for the next certain number of years. And the relief, the benefit of that for the individuals would be enormous reassurance, and for the community would be those people may not need screening. That one's not here yet, but when I'm looking 10 years hence, I think we will have some results of tests where things are happening there. It's a big area, and the developments in AI in particular is going to help recognize patterns that humans can't see.
Okay, all right. AI, it's coming from my job, but I didn't know it was coming for yours too.
Everyone's job.
Exactly. Anyway, it's all human intelligence that it's working off, and we're seeing a great demonstration of how intelligent humans can be on this panel this evening. I've got a video question now from Sue, which I'm going to direct to you, Fran, if you wouldn't mind answering. I'm going to play this question now. This is from Sue.
Hi, my name is Sue Lin Wan. I'm a doctor patient. And my question is, in the light of improving treatments, how can you predict survival time for someone? Are improvements moving at a rate that is faster than the survival rate statistics currently? Thank you.
I love that question, actually, and Leslie and I have been discussing a way that we might help people with early breast cancer to get better information about their likely risk of the cancer spreading, because that risk of recurrence is something that is clearly of great importance. We know that data from recent clinical trials is better than historical data, and some of the tools that we've used in the past to help us with decision making, I think, are really quite outdated. So this is a project that I'm very much hoping we can move forward with this year with breast cancer trials. We are told by women, I don't necessarily remember the question that I asked about prognosis when I was first diagnosed. My head was in a spin, and it's a difficult time to have those challenging conversations. And some of those patients who end up having Herceptin and chemo and immunotherapy are doing so because they're high risk. And every time they see their doctor, they think about themselves as high risk. Whereas in fact, once they've had all that stuff, their risk is no worse than anybody else's. So we've had to give them a lot of treatment to bring them up to average or good risk of someone who maybe in Bruce's trial didn't need any of that. And I think we need to stop, talking about high risk all the time. Unfortunately, every time we ring the government to get access to a drug, we have to say those words over the phone, which is a problem. But we need to find some better ways to communicate with women with early breast cancer. There's been good research done in Australia about how to use clinical trial data to communicate survival times for people who have metastatic breast cancer. And Belinda Kiley, who's one of our colleagues, has taught us how to do that better. It's also the case, though, that those statistics are going to be outdated quite soon. And this is where data from the Cancer Institute and from the registries is actually going to be able to help us, because people whose cancer is less severe and they're diagnosed with metastatic disease will tend to do better than the data that we have up to date. So that's one of the great benefits of using registry data. It's usually better.
Fran, it's so good of you to give us an insight into the kind of matrix of considerations that you're operating in when you're talking about prognoses. I think that's really valuable for everybody on the call to hear, because obviously people who are going through it are sometimes in a bit of a daze, sometimes very, very frightened and uncertain and full of doubts. So it's really good to hear what that situation looks like from the clinical angle. And it's great to hear you talk about the thought that's underway in developing those messages.
And Annabelle too, I would just say I'd encourage anybody who's had breast cancer to ask about your prognosis. And you may not want to ask about that to a large extent on day one, but once you get to know your team and you've had a chance to process what's going on, ask again. And if you have metastatic disease, keep asking, because we actually get better at prognosis further down the stream we go. And oncologists are easily prompted to have that conversation, but of course they're stepping a little bit, gently. So if you're the kind of person who likes to ask for information, just make sure that you ask and you ask again.
That is a great piece of advice. Thank you, Fran. I'm going to swivel to Stephen Lewin now. I've got a question from Margaret, which I think is best directed to you. Margaret says she has a very strong history of breast cancer in her family, but genetic testing has not identified a genetic mutation. She's asked, where is research up to for identifying genetic links in breast cancer?
So two things. I think it's probably worth noting there has been a recent approval of a drug called olaparib that we can use in the adjuvant setting, which improves overall survival for patients with breast cancer if there is a BRCA1 or 2 mutation. Now, through that process, there's been a lot of broadening of allowed reimbursement for germline testing, standard germline testing for patients with breast cancer. And it is now the case that, the majority of our patients have some form of avenue of mechanism for getting reimbursed testing for standard genetic testing. So this is really exciting for all of us, because, a lot of us remember the time when we could hardly access these tests. So this is a real positive outcome for us. Getting to the crux of the question is a little more complicated. We know that there are families that have very strong history of breast cancer and other cancers, but we're not able to find or identify a clear genetic alteration that we know of that could be linking these cases. So I guess to try to conceptualize it in as simply as I can, we have done a lot of research into single genes that are associated with breast cancer or other cancers. But what we poorly understand is how multiple genes together can contribute to risk. And so this is kind of the area where I think genetic, our understanding of genetics and risk is coming together. We need to look broader than just single genes. And we need to understand how, when there's changes in multiple genes, how they interact to, surmise the risk, a lifetime risk of cancer in a patient. I think there's ongoing work being done there, and we're fortunate enough to have some very large groups, research groups in Australia that have a lot of patients with strong family histories on their books. Another problem or potential area of research is that our current testing for mutations has some limitations. And so there are new technologies that look in a different way at the genome. So for example, there's something called long read sequencing, which is coming through, which will help us understand the full extent of the gene when we do those sequencing. And I'm involved in a project where we're taking those high-risk families without BRCA1 or 2 mutations that we know about, and really trying to find these, these novel changes so that we can use that to, to identify risk in individuals.
Stephen, we had a question from Carly, and it seems like a good place to ask this of you. Is this research into the genetics of breast cancer likely to bring about better tools for earlier detection as well as for treatment for patients with a family history, I mean?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So I think, we have quite good guidelines that are available for helping us to understand what sort of processes we should do in the patients who are at risk. For example, there's better surveillance, there's younger surveillance, and it's pretty clear to us that, when you diagnose these tumors at an earlier stage, there is usually a better outcome. So I think, definitely in these patients with family history, where there's an identified genetic predisposition, we really need to focus on early detection. That will really improve our survival rates. There was a recent research published on outcomes in patients with BRCA1 and 2 mutations. And actually, the rates of what medical oncologists feel, which is something we call distant recurrence, that is, recurrence at a distant site, metastatic disease, is actually pretty low if we know about their mutation status. So, looking into that can really help. I think Bruce might have had a comment too.
Thank you, Stephen. We're running super
sorry.
time, and we had a question from Cameron about blood test-based diagnosis coming up next, but I think Bruce has actually already addressed that in his ahead of the game way. I'm going to jump now to Leslie, because we've got a question about what areas of breast cancer, and this is important to hear from somebody in your position. You speak for a lot of people who are on this call, I think. What areas of breast cancer would you like to see prioritized in research, and why?
Yeah, look, how long's a piece of string, really? But it's actually refreshing to hear Stephen talking about genetics and the advances there, because there's nothing, I think, more frustrating, similar to Prognosis. There's nothing more frustrating to a patient than being told after a genetic test that it's inconclusive, because there's more research needs to be done. So I think that's fantastic. There's clearly still challenges in metastatic disease, including why do some people metastasize, others don't? What is that mechanism? What does that look like? There's obviously more diagnostic research to inform treatment optimization, and I think that's well and truly a good thing. And I guess supportive care research. Our researchers, because of their brilliance, early breast cancer patients are living long lives. Metastatic breast cancer patients are living longish lives. And I think the short and long-term side effects of the treatments can sometimes impact patients just as much as what the actual disease does. So, you know, things like cardiac toxicity, you know, and as Fran touched on, the risk of recurrence, you know, being able to tell people that no, you're not going to have a recurrence. So I think that would be like really good. And being able to provide patients with evidence-based information to make them be able to make informed decisions based on their risk. I think that's really something that we could look forward to. Prevention, screening options, and as Bruce mentioned, consumer-initiated or consumer-driven research, because as I mentioned earlier, you know, if you don't have patients involved in research, but also research that patients want, then we won't have a research program.
Great answer. Thank you, Leslie. We never run out of good things to research, right?
Absolutely.
Where time is running short, but I wanted to just arrow in on some specific questions that we had correspondents send in. One for you, Bruce, which is about ductal carcinoma in situ, or DCIS. Yep. Melissa has asked if there are any new research developments in the treatment of DCIS.
Yes, there is actually. Interesting study just came out suggesting that for a subset of patients with DCIS, that observation may be reasonable, that we may not need to immediately operate, but if we, rather than operate for lower risk group, just keeping a patient under surveillance, a majority will never need surgery or won't need surgery, at least for the next 5 to 10 years. That's one thing. And then the other are some new tests, some assays that may be able to identify those patients with DCIS who do not need radiation after surgery, which would reduce the intensity, again, going to optimization. I think they're the two main areas. To me, DCIS, a very important part of breast cancer prevention. It's not cancer. By treating it and eradicating it, we're preventing cancer, is an important thing to keep in mind there.
Okay, optimization in action. Thank you, Bruce, including for your incredibly brief and incisive response to that question. Fran, I'm going to give you a question that's come in from Julie, who says that she's had severe reactions to letrozole. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And her side effects from treatment continue to evolve. Julie wants to know, where's research up to in reducing side effects of treatment, including hormone blockers?
Again, a very good question. And the first thing that we would probably do if someone's having severe side effects of a hormone blocking medicine is take them off it and try something different. And this might be an opportunity for that patient to consider seeing a medical oncologist if they haven't already done so, because we're the ones who are good at fiddling around with different drug combinations. And sometimes people experience very severe hot flushes with those sorts of hormone blocking medications. And I'm pleased to say there are now some better researched treatments for hot flushes becoming available in Australia, which is very exciting. The thing that we're not yet very good at fixing is the joint and muscle stiffness and aching that comes often around menopause, but particularly with these drugs. And so that might be a reason to look at changing to something different. And in terms of other side effects of hormone blocking treatment, this is an area that Leslie's team, of course, are very interested in, and how patients can usefully weigh up what's the best treatment for me. So, for instance, for our patients with lobular cancer, we do know that drugs like letrozole are in that category, are actually probably the best choice. But there are two others. And so sometimes just by tweaking from one to another, you can help alleviate some of those symptoms. If a person doesn't have lobular cancer, they may do just as well on tamoxifen or on one of the newer drugs in the tamoxifen category that's making their way into clinical trial at the moment. So it, again, is an example of trying to individualise that advice.
Oh, well, you're a mind reader because Sean has asked about lobular breast cancer. So thank you very much for foreseeing his request for information there. We are trying to get you all out of here and on to your next job of the evening and being rejoined with your families if you're one of the 2,500 people who have tuned in. I'm going to shoot Stephen a question from a correspondent called Lee. Stephen, Lee wants to know, is there a place for research into integrative and alternative medicine in the treatment of breast cancer?
Yeah, this is always a hot topic. So I guess my sense is, firstly, that there's a reasonable proportion of our patients who seek consultations with practitioners outside of what we'd call conventional practice. And I have to say, I think, in a lot of occasions, the communication between us is not great. So that's something we definitely need to work on. Secondly, I suspect some of my patients and some of our patients, they take alternative medical treatments without us knowing. And I think, the great shame of this is that we're not sharing this knowledge. So I feel there's a lot to be done to try to understand the interactions between our own treatments and alternative and integrative treatments. And I think, better communication is a big step towards that. When it comes to research, I'm totally for research into this. And I think this will, this helps us understand exactly the place of some of these medicines. And I think, there's plenty of opportunities in this space, but, really the onus is on us to make sure that research is robust and safe for our patients and ethical. So, I think, plenty to work on in this space.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. We have really come up against the hard end of the hour and a half we had scheduled. I really want, because we've been answering questions that have been directed from people on the call, I'd love to hear just briefly from each of our panel members, what is it that excites you the most about the future of breast cancer research? What makes your heart skip a little faster? Stephen?
Oh, well, I haven't got to sort of explain where my career sits, but I'm really in drug development. So I'm really excited about a lot of the new drugs coming through, new drug targets. We didn't get to talk too much about triple negative breast cancer and resistance mechanisms, but I'm super excited to be able to bring new drugs that are less toxic, more effective, and I think that's going to make a big difference in outcomes for our patients.
Okay, I'm sure there's a lot of triple negative breast cancer people who will be really excited to hear your enthusiasm on that front. Bruce, what about you?
Yeah, the area I'm interested in is risk-adjusted screening. So identifying those women who, for rather than one size fits all, work out for each large groups of women who should start early with more intense screening, and perhaps another large group for whom less intense screening is sufficient. I think if we can find an increasing proportion of cancers at stage 0 and 1, that will make the biggest difference. And then Stephen's new drugs can fix the rest of them and make them chronic disease. And I think together we will have solved this disease.
Okay, I'm increasingly thinking we've got the A-team on this panel tonight. Fran, what is it that excites you the most?
Well, I want to be able to set people free after they've had treatment for breast cancer. I want to be able to reassure them that they're not going to have a recurrence. And I'm really interested, therefore, in a better understanding of why some people relapse, to Leslie's point, when they've done everything right, and why it is that some of the cancer cells in their system have gone to sleep quietly in a corner and the treatment's kind of passed over their heads, and we haven't been able to trick them into making themselves vulnerable and then at a later time cause the cancer to reactivate. And there's a lot in that. I think probably that's my next 5 years of work before I retire. I don't think we're going to be seeing that any day soon, but I'm really excited about that prospect.
Don't retire, Fran. We need you too much. Leslie, I'm going to finish with you because breast cancer trials can't operate without participants, and it's been exciting tonight to hear about the influence that participants have in the direction of the research that's being conducted. What is it that makes you excited?
Well, firstly, I think once you're a participant, you become a partner in the research. That's the most important thing. But what really excites me, I could go through all the things we've discussed tonight, like everything that everyone's mentioned just now. But I think it's the speed of the advancements in research compared to when I was first involved, compared to now. It's just going at a mere miles an hour. And I think everything that everyone has raised tonight is achievable. It's just how long it's going to take. And I guess, you know, I'm always grateful, as are all the CAP members, that BCT, its researchers and consumers are all working together to hopefully achieve those outcomes.
Leslie, thank you for saying that, because the world seems to operate at just an unimaginably accelerating pace at the moment, and normally it's bad stuff. So it's good to hear that the good stuff is accelerating too. That's an exhilarating place to end our discussion tonight. I'd like to thank our panel, Leslie, Bruce, Fran, and Stephen. I just want to say, you know, it's one thing to have a great brain that is able to conduct research. It's another thing to be able to talk about it really explicitly and with restraint and clarity. And one thing that I've noticed about our panel tonight is how great they are at doing that. It's hard to explain complicated things in a comprehensible way. So I'd like to thank them for being so very good at that. This Q&A has been recorded and will be available on the Breast Cancer Trials website tomorrow. Team will send everybody on this call a link to be able to watch or share it. So if you think there's something that's been raised tonight that'll be of use to somebody that you know, please share it. Don't forget that Breast Cancer Trials operates only with the resources that it has. If you're in a position to support the work that Breast Cancer Trials does, run, don't walk. As you know, Breast Cancer Trials is committed to improving the outcomes for every person diagnosed with breast cancer through that research. Thank you for your attention, your questions, your attendance tonight. Thank you to the panel. See you next time. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Annabelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.